The engine in your driveway that everyone told you to scrap. I want to talk about that one. Not the one that's running fine. Not the one that just needs an oil change. The one that's knocking. The one that's burning oil, losing compression, making that sound that makes your stomach drop every time you turn the key. The one the mechanic quoted you $3,000, $4,000, sometimes $5,000 to fix, and then looked at you with that expression. The one that says, just buy another car. What if that wasn't actually your only option? I've been down a rabbit hole for the last few months, going through old service manuals, talking to retired mechanics, digging into repair forums that haven't been active since 2009. And one thing kept coming up. Over and over. This almost embarrassingly simple, embarrassingly cheap liquid treatment that mechanics used to reach for before the industry decided that replacing parts was more profitable than saving them. And here's the part that gets me. This stuff costs 50 cents. Sometimes less. You can find it at any hardware store, any grocery store, sometimes the dollar section of a pharmacy. It's been sitting on shelves this whole time. While people were scrapping engines. While families were taking on car payments they couldn't afford. While the repair industry was billing hundreds of dollars an hour for diagnostics. 50 cents. Here's what the dealership experience actually looks like for most people. You bring your car in because something's wrong. Maybe it's overheating. Maybe there's a knock that wasn't there 6 months ago. Maybe it started burning through oil at a rate that doesn't make sense. The service advisor, and most of these people are just doing their job, they're not villains, but the service advisor comes back with a clipboard and a number that makes your vision blur slightly. And what are your options at that point? You either pay it, you finance it, you trade the car in and take on a payment, or you walk away and figure out something else. Most people pay it, because what else are you going to do? But here's what's interesting. Engine wear, the core issue behind most of these expensive repair bills, isn't always catastrophic. A lot of what gets labeled as a failing engine or a blown motor is actually a progressive wear problem. Piston rings that have lost their seal, cylinder walls that have developed microscoring, metal surfaces that have worn past their tolerance just enough to let combustion gases escape where they shouldn't, to let oil get past where it shouldn't. That distinction matters, because progressive wear and catastrophic structural failure are two very different problems. One of them has options, the other one doesn't. What most people never get told, what nobody in a service bay has a financial incentive to mention, is that certain types of engine wear are addressable without pulling the motor, without machining, without a rebuild. Sometimes, with the right compound introduced into the right place, those gaps can be reduced enough to restore meaningful compression, reduce oil consumption, and bring an engine back from the edge of what everyone assumed was the end. Before synthetic oils, before computer diagnostics, before the era of just replace it, mechanics had a completely different relationship with broken engines. If you go back to the mid-20th century, the 1940s, 50s, into the 60s, engines were expensive, parts were expensive, and the assumption was that you repaired things. You didn't discard them. There was a whole culture of mechanical ingenuity built around making things last, around understanding what was actually failing and addressing it at the source rather than swapping out the whole assembly. And in that era, a handful of treatments and compounds became standard knowledge in independent garages. Things that weren't sold at dealerships. Things that didn't have massive marketing budgets. Just practical solutions that worked, passed down between mechanics who actually cared about fixing the car rather than billing hours. One of those things was sodium silicate solution. Another was a sulfur-based EP additive compound. But the one that kept coming up in the oldest repair literature, the one that showed up in the most independent testimonials, the one that mechanics in old forum posts kept referencing as the thing they always tried first, was a water-based solution of a specific soft metal compound that most people have in their homes right now and have never thought to connect to engine repair. We'll get to exactly what it is in a moment. But first, I want you to understand why this knowledge kind of faded out. Because it didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because the economics of the repair industry changed. Dealerships grew. Manufacturer service contracts became standard. The culture shifted from independent repair toward authorized service centers where standardized procedures replaced improvised solutions. An independent mechanic in 1958 who could revive a tired engine with a 30-cent treatment was valuable. That same knowledge in a dealership model of 2005 was a liability. It reduced revenue. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how economic incentives work. So let's get into it. What is this thing, and why does it cost less than a pack of gum? The liquid in question is a diluted solution of sodium, silicate, also known in its everyday form as water glass. And before you roll your eyes at the name, stay with me, because the mechanism here is actually really interesting. Sodium silicate in solution is a clear, slightly viscous liquid. It's been used industrially for decades, in everything from waterproofing concrete to preserving eggs to making certain kinds of adhesives. At room temperature, in diluted form, it's stable and non-reactive. But introduce it to heat, specifically the kind of heat generated inside a combustion chamber, and it undergoes a physical transformation. At high temperatures, sodium silicate solution deposits a thin layer of solid silica, essentially a form of glass, across the surfaces it coats. That deposition is extremely fine. We're talking microns. But those micron-level deposits fill in the microscoring on cylinder walls. They can partially restore the sealing surface between piston rings and cylinder bores. They create a barrier that reduces combustion gas blowby, the leakage that drops compression, and they do it without adding anything thick or abrasive to the oil. This is why it was used, and this is why it works based on actual chemistry, not on hype. The reason you can buy it for 50 cents is that sodium silicate has been commercially available for over 100 years. It has no patent that needs protecting. It costs almost nothing to produce. There's no markup to sustain because there's no brand story around it. You'll find it in hardware stores sold as a sealant or concrete treatment. You can find it online for next to nothing. It is, genuinely, one of the most accessible chemical compounds you can buy. Now, and this is important, not every product labeled sodium silicate is the same concentration or formulation. For engine application, you want a diluted solution, typically in the range of 10 to 20% concentration, not the undiluted industrial concentrate. Using too high a concentration can cause overdeposition that creates its own problems. This is a precision application, even though the material itself is cheap. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. If this actually worked, wouldn't everyone be doing it? It's a fair question, and it deserves an honest answer. The reason it's not mainstream isn't that it doesn't work. It's that it works specifically. And the automotive service industry, both repair shops and parts manufacturers, has no incentive to promote a 50-cent solution when there are significantly more profitable alternatives on the shelf. Engine treatments with big marketing budgets, rebuild kits, engine replacements. These are what get recommended because these are what generate revenue. There's also the matter of application knowledge. Sodium silicate isn't something you just pour into the oil fill cap and hope for the best. The way it's introduced to the engine matters. The engine's temperature at the time of application matters. The volume used relative to the engine displacement matters. Get those variables wrong, and you either see no effect or, in the worst case, you cause an obstruction in an oil passage. This is exactly why I want to be clear. What I'm describing here is for educational purposes, and if your engine has significant mechanical damage, a spun bearing, a cracked block, serious oil pressure loss, this is not a fix for that. Those situations require professional assessment. What sodium silicate can address is the softer end of engine wear, reduced compression from ring wear, light cylinder scoring, gradual sealing loss that shows up as oil consumption over time, rather than sudden failure. The science behind it is the thermal deposition mechanism I mentioned, at combustion temperatures, which can exceed 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. In the chamber, the sodium silicate solution flashes and deposits its silica component across the hot surfaces. That deposition follows the topography of the metal, filling in low spots and scratches in a way that mechanical resurfacing simply can't reach during normal operation. Is it a magic cure? No. Does it work based on real chemistry, documented industrial use, and decades of practical application by mechanics who weren't getting paid to pretend it didn't exist? Yes. Okay, here's where we get practical. Because knowing about something and actually using it are two very different things. First, and I can't stress this enough, before you do anything to your engine, take some baseline measurements if you can. If you have a compression tester, run a compression test on each cylinder and write down the numbers. This gives you something to compare against after application. If you don't have a compression tester, note your oil consumption rate over a known distance. These aren't just for your own records. They're how you'll actually know whether this did anything. Step 1 is temperature. You want the engine warm but not hot. Run it for about 5 minutes, enough to bring it to operating temperature so the metal has expanded to its running dimensions, but not so hot that you're working around dangerous heat. Step 2 is dilution. If you've sourced undiluted sodium silicate, which comes as a thick, syrupy concentrate, you need to cut it down significantly before engine use. A working solution for this application is typically mixed at about 1 part concentrate to 8 to 10 parts distilled water. If you're using a pre-diluted hardware store formulation that's already at around 20%, you can dilute it slightly further. 1 part solution to 3 parts distilled water is a reasonable starting point. Step 3 is the introduction point. This is where most people get it wrong. You are not adding this to your oil. Let me repeat that. Do not add this to your engine oil. The correct introduction point is through the intake, either through a vacuum line, through the brake booster line with the engine running, or, if you're comfortable with the procedure, directly through the throttle body with the engine at idle. The goal is to get the solution into the combustion chambers as a fine mist during normal combustion cycles. The engine's own heat does the work from there. Step 4, the volume. For a typical 4-cylinder engine, you're working with somewhere in the range of half a cup to 1 cup of prepared solution, introduced slowly over the course of 15 to 20 minutes of idle. Not dumped in all at once, introduced gradually while the engine idles and reaches full operating temperature. Step 5 is the most important one. After application, let the engine idle for another 20 minutes. Don't rev it. Don't drive it hard. Let those combustion temperatures do the work steadily and consistently. Then let the engine cool completely before doing anything else. After a full cool down period, ideally overnight, restart the engine and pay attention. The difference, if the wear profile of your engine is the right type for this treatment, will often show up in how the engine sounds at idle. A slightly smoother, less rattly idle. Sometimes a noticeable reduction in blue smoke from the exhaust if oil consumption was the issue. Run your compression test again. Compare the numbers. Let me be straight with you about what this can and can't do. This treatment is not going to fix a rod knock. It's not going to repair a damaged crankshaft. It won't seal a cracked head gasket on its own, and it won't restore an engine that's already lost oil pressure due to bearing failure. If you're dealing with any of those situations, you need a professional mechanic, full stop. What it can meaningfully address is the wear-based loss of compression and sealing that accumulates over time and distance. The gradual degradation that shows up as slightly lower compression readings across multiple cylinders, as oil that disappears between changes faster than it used to, as a rougher cold start than the engine used to have. That category of wear, which is actually how the majority of tired or struggling engines present, is where this has a documented history of producing real improvement. Results vary. That's not a disclaimer thrown in to cover liability. It's just the truth. An engine with cylinder walls that are scored lightly will respond better than one with heavy scoring. The age of the rings matters. The overall condition of the sealing surfaces matters. Some engines come back noticeably, others improve modestly. Some, where the wear is too advanced or the wrong type, see minimal effect. But given that the cost of trying is 50 cents and an hour of your time, versus $3,000 to $5,000 for a rebuild, the math of exploring this option first seems pretty obvious. There's a reason this kind of knowledge tends to live. In old repair manuals, in the notebooks of retired mechanics, in the conversations of people who grew up fixing their own cars. It's not the kind of knowledge that benefits from being widely known in a service economy. The more capable people are of extending the life of what they already own, the less dependent they are on the services that have been built around the assumption of replacement. And I think there's something worth noticing about that. Not in a paranoid way, not as some grand conspiracy, but just as a pattern. The things that are cheap, effective, and accessible tend to get crowded out by the things that are expensive, convenient, and profitable. That's not anyone's fault necessarily. It's just what happens when economic incentives shape what knowledge gets passed on and what knowledge gets quietly set aside. The mechanics who knew this stuff weren't hiding it. They weren't part of some underground network. They were just people who'd been working on engines long enough to know what actually worked and who didn't have a financial reason to pretend otherwise. A guy running a 2-bay garage in a small town who could save your engine for 50 cents in materials and 2 hours of his time was doing you a favor. He was also probably keeping your business for the next 20 years. That relationship between honest repair and long-term trust, that's what got lost somewhere along the way. And pieces of knowledge like this one are what's left from it. If your engine is already running well, great, tuck this away. You might not need this for years. Or maybe you do need it right now. And this is the thing that shifts the calculation on what you thought was going to be a really expensive few months. Either way, the point is that you know it. You have it. And that kind of practical knowledge, the kind that actually keeps money in your pocket and puts the decision-making back in your hands rather than in a service advisor's clipboard, is worth something that's hard to put a number on. Before you try this, please do consult with a mechanic you trust, especially if your engine has any serious known issues beyond normal wear. Go in informed. Ask them about sodium silicate treatment specifically. See what they say. Some will know exactly what you're talking about and have opinions either way. Others will be encountering it for the first time. Either conversation is useful. And if you want to go deeper on this, if you want the specific sourcing guide, the exact dilution ratios for different engine sizes, and the full walkthrough of the vacuum introduction method, that's what the next video is going to cover. A complete documented process video on a real engine so you can see exactly what this looks like from start to finish. If you've made it this far, you're clearly not someone who takes the first expensive answer at face value. And that's exactly the kind of curiosity this channel is built for. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss that follow-up, because it's going to go into significantly more detail than anything I've found on this topic in one place. There's a lot of useful knowledge out there that never made it into the mainstream. We're going to keep finding it,